Introduction to Unlimited Explosive Soldiers in the Three Kingdoms. www.zhaozuiyuan.com Li Ji traveled to the Three Kingdoms period and obtained the headquarters of a real-time strategy game. From then on, Li Ji began to unleash his army and pushed the entire era horizontally. Ciao ciao. I have countless literary officials, 1,000 generals, and 1,000,000 brave soldiers. Li Ji. I can explode troops, but I am not afraid of life and death. Liu Bei. I am unparalleled in benevolence and righteousness, the will of the people, and all my subordinates are loyal and righteous. Li Ji. https://www.zhaozuiyuan.com. Chapter 1. Crossing Three Countries. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. Li Ji, with the courtesy name Shan, was the third emperor of the Tang dynasty and the ninth son of Emperor Taizong of Tang, Li Shimin. His mother was the eldest grandson of Empress Wen Deshun, Kuejia. Former Crown Prince Li Qingqian and Wei King Li Tai were the same mother and younger brother, and the husband of Empress Wu Zetian. Li Ji was born in the second year of the Zhenguan reign and was granted the title of King of Jin in the fifth year of the Zhenguan reign. Later Crown Prince Li Qingqian and Wei King Li Tai were successively deposed, and were registered as Crown Prince in the 17th year of the Zhenguan reign. In the 23rd year of the Zhenguan reign, Emperor Taizong of Tang, Li Shimin, passed away, and Crown Prince Li Ji ascended to the throne, becoming Emperor Gaozong of Tang. In the 6th year of the Yonghui reign, Empress Wang was deposed and Empress Wu Zetian was appointed as the Empress Dowager. During the reign of Li Ji, he successively conquered the Western Turks, Beich, and Goguryeo, achieving the maximum territory of the Tang dynasty. It can also be considered as leaving a name in the annals of history. Of course, these have nothing to do with the protagonist of this book. The only constraint is that our protagonist, also known as Li Ji, unfortunately has a different name and destiny. If it weren't for the death of the ghost father who had already died, Li Ji would have asked him whatever he said. How did he remember to give himself the name of an emperor? Is his life so hard, can he hold on to this name? What made Li Ji even more desperate was his current situation. At this moment, Li Jizheng was standing in a mountain valley, with a simple thatched cottage behind him. All of this made Li Ji feel extremely confused. What is the situation and why are you here? Li Jibin is a social animal who lives a leisurely life of 955 yuan per day. Although he is a worker and his salary is not high, fortunately, his family is not hungry when he is alone. That 3,000 yuan salary is enough to cover his own expenses. As long as you don't play flower games and stay at home after work every day to read novels and browse short videos, life is quite comfortable. But I didn't expect to go camping just once on the weekend, and wake up like this now. Where is my car? Where is my tent? At this moment, Li Ji was desperate and completely unaware of what had happened. Looking at the tattered clothes and small wounds all over my body, the cliff is the result of rolling down from the mountain. Did I accidentally fall to the foot of the mountain while sleeping? Li Ji thought to himself. But that's not right either. I remember camping in a mountain valley at the time, and it was impossible for me to roll down the mountain. Moreover, my clothes are not my own now. Am I being kidnapped? But just me, a poor social animal, what's worth being kidnapped for? The biggest asset is that second-hand wuling. It's not worth 10,000 yuan when it's thrown into the second-hand car market. Who would kidnap me for this money? All of this was unreasonable and made Li Ji unable to understand. At this moment, there was a sudden headache, as if something had forcefully entered Li Ji's mind. That is a memory. After Li Ji digested the memory that suddenly appeared in his mind, he finally understood what had happened. He also caught up with the trend and crossed over. This was supposed to be a happy event. Nowadays, no one has ever imagined that one day they will be able to travel through a wave. Especially for social animals like Li Ji, they often have such fantasies. I fantasize about traveling through a different world, and from then on, every second, every second, every second, every second, every second, every second. From then on, he lived a corrupt life where he regained power and lay drunk on the knees of a beautiful woman. But reality is cruel. Not to mention the achievement of the heavenly emperor, he is independent for eternity and invincible in the world. At least it wouldn't be like this now. Others travel through time as emperors, princes, or saints of the immortal cultivation sect, pushing their way across the heavens. Why did you come here to travel and become a rogue? Don't misunderstand, the hooligan here refers to the meaning of having no house or land. In ancient times, those without houses were called flo, and those without land were called hooligans. The original identity of Li Ji's travels is such a rogue. The most frustrating thing for Li Ji was that according to his original memory, it is now the 6th year of Zhongping, which is 189 AD. That's right, it was the end of the Eastern Han dynasty, when there were continuous wars and the people were struggling. Moreover, it was not long after the death of Emperor Ling of Hanlu Honggang, when Emperor Shao of Hanlu Bian ascended to the throne and granted amnesty to the world. In such an era, I am still traveling as a rogue, and whether I can survive well is a question. Although the era of the Three Kingdoms, where many heroes emerged, is very exciting, it is also those big shots who find it interesting. With an identity like Li Ziyuan, let alone standing out, one day he might be directly affected by the war and die. The only consolation is that the Yellow Turban Rebellion has passed and is currently relatively calm. But it won't be long before the feudal lords compete for supremacy, and by then there will still be a raging war. Because soon He Jin would summon Dong Zhuo to the capital, and he himself would be killed by the 10 constant attendants. Then Dong Zhuo would enter Luoyang and threaten the emperor to order the princes, causing cholera in the imperial palace. As a result, it led to the feudal lords fighting against Dong, ultimately developing into a situation of feudal lords vying for supremacy. At that time, it will be a truly chaotic era, with almost the entire Han dynasty at war. Li Ji began to worry about his future. Although Li Ji knew what would happen next, he had no ability to change everything and could only go with the flow and try to find ways to save his life. See if there is a chance to step out and live a better life in the late Eastern Han dynasty. Zhaozuiyuan.com. According to his original memory, he just wanted to come into the mountains to find some food before the autumn harvest, but he didn't want to roll off the cliff and went straight ahead. This is a cheap way for Li Ji to travel here. As for the original name, let's not mention it. As a commoner, what good name can there be? It's nothing more than cheap names like Dog Egg and Ernyo. Li Ji has decided to call himself Li Ji in the future. As for changing his name, will it be a problem? Li Ji doesn't have to worry about this at all. There is no throne to inherit in the family, and my original identity was just a tenant working for the aristocratic family. I have no sense of existence, and even if I die outside, no one will care. And Li Ji doesn't want to continue as a tenant, so it's better to change his name and start a new life. To farm for others, I am tired every day. I can't live as well as a dog, just because there is only one meal on that day, but I can't even see rice. Li Ji is not that cheap. He can fully utilize modern knowledge to do any business and live the life he desires. Thinking of this, Li Ji no longer struggled with his original identity, but turned around and walked towards the thatched cottage behind him. Since I woke up here, there was no sign of human foot around me. It's not normal for a thatched cottage to suddenly appear like this. Li Ji plans to go inside and see what's going on. Even if it's the worst outcome, I can still live in seclusion here and stay away from the world's wars in the future. He didn't believe it. As a modern man, he could still starve to death here. It was better to go back to being a tenant and live on a bowl of porridge every day. But just as Li Ji stepped into the thatched cottage, something unexpected happened. Chapter 2. Is this playing a game? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, in Li Ji's mind, a light curtain appeared with two pictures on it, more like two options. The first picture is a man dressed in simple clothes, and the second picture is a green arrow pointing upwards. When Li Ji focused his attention on the first picture, a message suddenly entered his mind. My husband force. 20 Commander-in-Chief. 20 Intelligence. 20 Internal Affairs. 20 Charm. 20 Production requires 1 stone of grain and takes 15 minutes. This message left Li Ji's mind in a daze. What exactly is this situation? Did time travel damage the brain and cause hallucinations? How does this look like a game attribute? Why does it appear in my mind? Then Li Ji looked at another picture, the upward arrow. Then a paragraph came to Li Ji's mind. The conditions are not sufficient to upgrade. At this point, Li Ji can almost be 100% certain that this is a game interface. The picture of that man doesn't show much, but the upward arrow indicates an upgrade. As for what game it is, Li Ji is still unclear. If we only look at the attributes of the commoner, it is a bit like the attributes passed down by the Three Kingdoms. This is quite in line with the world background of the late Eastern Han Dynasty. But the interface on this light screen looks like some kind of real-time strategy game like RTS. If he had to find a similar game, Li Ji felt a bit like this game from the Age of Empires, but there were also some differences. The game Age of Empires was played by Li Ji many years ago. The interface on this screen may look a bit similar, but the data is very different. In the Age of Empires game, producing a farmer requires 40% of food. But now only 1 stone of grain is needed. If Li Ji remembers correctly, in the Han Dynasty, once the grain was equal to 120 kilograms. There is a considerable gap among them. Moreover, the character's attributes are not correct, but rather similar to other games. In the game, it only takes a short time to produce a farmer, but here it takes 15 minutes. According to ancient time calculations, 1 hour is equivalent to 4/4 of an hour, and 1 hour is equivalent to 2 modern hours. Therefore, 1/4 of an hour is half an hour. There are also significant differences in production time. However, these are not important. What Li Ji wants to know most now is why these pieces of information appear in his mind. If it weren't for a broken brain and hallucinations, then it's highly likely to be your golden finger. After all, as an otaku and a social animal, reading novels is almost a daily task for Li Ji, and he naturally knows that the setting of a golden finger is necessary for travelers. Since I have traveled, it is not surprising that I have golden fingers. Can I understand that I can use this golden finger to explode like playing a timely strategy game? As for the difference between this golden finger and the game he remembered, Li Ji didn't care at all, as long as he had a golden finger. Thinking of this, Li Ji immediately became excited. I immediately planned to try the function of this golden finger to see if it can really explode weapons. But Li Ji quickly froze. The explosive soldiers needed a stone of grain, and he was now in dire straits. Where could he find a stone of grain? That's a full 120 pounds. If you save some food, it will be enough for Li Ji to eat on his own for 2 months. Even if it's for soldiers to eat, a stone of grain is enough to eat for a month. If there were so much food, the original body wouldn't have run into the mountains and forests to find food, so it would have rolled off the cliff and died. Just as Li Ji was thinking about where to find food to test his golden finger, he accidentally saw a row of data below the light curtain. Li Ji immediately focused his attention and understood the meaning of these data. Population. 0 grain. 10 wood. 10 iron ore. 10 money. 10 This data is simple and clear, and the meaning can be seen at a glance. Among them, the population goes without saying. Currently, Li Ji is still alone, so naturally there is no other population. The ones behind represent various resources, with a quantity of 10. The unit of grain is stone, the unit of wood is roots, representing a whole tree, and the unit of iron ore is the least, calculated by Gene. And money is quite excessive, it is calculated according to the ancient tradition of having a total of 1,000 copper coins. It's very excessive. If Li Ji needs to increase his financial data in the future, it will not be easy. However, these are things that can only be considered in the future, and currently Li Ji only wants to try the function of this golden finger. These resources are obviously startup funds given to oneself by Golden Finger, or in other words, novice gift packages. Since the resources were available, Li Ji no longer hesitated and began to produce farmers. This is also the only place where Li Ji can currently operate. At the same time, Li Ji saw a progress bar appearing on the light screen, and the rest of the time was waiting. Quickly, half an hour has passed, and the progress bar has finally been completed. The next moment, a poorly dressed man appeared in the thatched cottage, looking for the Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com. Without waiting for Li Ji to see clearly, the man walked directly outside the thatched cottage and quickly stopped not far away. All of this is very similar to those real-time strategy games. Li Ji also followed out and looked at the man up close. Li Ji quickly felt a wave of disappointment in his heart. At the same time, I also understood the role of my golden finger. My golden finger is like what I previously guessed, capable of exploding troops, spending certain resources, and producing a population, similar to what is happening in the game. This is indeed a joyful thing. What disappointed Li Ji was that the population produced by this golden finger had dull eyes and no self-awareness, just like a string puppet. Li Ji must be like playing games, issuing orders to command these people, otherwise they will only stand in place and daydream. However, it is gratifying that as long as it is an order given by Li Ji, they can meticulously complete it, and they will continue to repeat it without the need for Li Ji to keep an eye on it. Isn't this just like playing games at the same time? Then it's the strength of this commoner, all attributes are 20 points, and since there is no comparison, Li Ji doesn't know what the specific strength looks like. If we look at the attributes in the Three Kingdoms heroes, these 20 attributes can be said to be worthless. However, upon reflection, no matter which game it is, this commoner is the farmer in the game, and low attack power is normal. As for the specific strength, it will only be known through comparison in the future. What pleased Li Ji the most was that the population produced by his golden finger no longer needed further investment. Chapter 3. Game Headquarters. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, that is to say, Li Ji only needs to spend 1 stone of grain to obtain a young and strong labor force, and he doesn't need to eat. How dare you believe this? Previously, Li Ji was still thinking that just producing 1 commoner would require 1 stone of grain, and in the future, he would have to provide them with food and drink every day. Even if he saved some food, he would still need 5 or 6 stones of grain a year. Can I really afford to raise them myself? Even if these commoners can help Li Ji with his work, how much can be left after deducting expenses? Besides, the cost is still so expensive. With so much food, how many people can't find it in this chaotic world? In such a chaotic world, as long as you say you want to eat for yourself, some people will come to sacrifice their lives for you. Do you still need this golden finger to spend so much food to produce the population? Then this golden finger looks a bit weak. Apart from ensuring the loyalty of the produced population, everything else is not cost-effective, right? Previously, Li Ji only wanted to try the function of the golden finger and didn't have much to consider. Later on, he realized that this was not a golden finger, it was just a big pit. But now that he knew that the population produced by this golden finger didn't need to eat, Li Ji finally felt relieved. This can be considered cheating. Although producing 1 stone of grain for a commoner may be a bit expensive, in the long run, it is still very cost-effective. After all, the population you recruit from outside, let alone the issue of loyalty, just giving them food every year is not just a stone of grain. And the population produced by this golden finger only takes 2 to 3 months to recover and continuously generate value for oneself. The most important thing is that they don't know about fatigue, can work 24 hours a day, are fearless of cold and heat, don't know about hunger and thirst, and are reliable robots. As long as it is not killed, it can exist forever. Although Li Ji is not sure if these populations will have a life expectancy limit, they are definitely much better than those recruited outside. So it seems that my golden fingers are really heartfelt, they are definitely big golden thighs. Thinking of this, Li Ji could no longer bear it and immediately ran back to the thatched cottage, preparing to use all other resources and produce more laborers to help him with his work. As long as he had these golden fingers, perhaps Li Ji could also make a difference in this chaotic era of the Three Kingdoms. As long as there are enough subordinates in the future, even if one ascends to the throne and dominates the world, it is possible. How could this not make Li Ji feel excited? So, Li Ji wished he could immediately summon countless armies to expand his territory. But now Li Ji's resources are too limited, he can only play games slowly. First, produce more commoners to help oneself collect resources, and gradually develop one's own power. At this moment, Li Ji's gaze towards this thatched cottage began to glow. No, according to the name in the game, this is not a thatched cottage. It's completely my headquarters. It seems that we need to protect ourselves well in the future, as this is the foundation of our own existence in this world. Just as Li Ji was about to step into the thatched cottage, no, it's time to hand it over to headquarters in the future. Just as Li Ji was about to enter the headquarters, he realized that the light curtain in his mind had not disappeared, and he could operate even outside the headquarters. This made Li Ji even happier, as it would be much more convenient to explode his own troops in the future. At least in the future, you don't have to constantly stay here and can operate in other places. Otherwise, what else would we talk about competing for the world? We stay in this mountain valley every day and can't go anywhere. How can we play and compete for the world? After all, unlike Red Alert in StarCraft, this headquarters is not mobile. At first glance, this thatched cottage is the kind that cannot be moved, so it can only be fixed here. I just don't know if we can build another headquarters like those real-time strategy games in the future. If possible, then this headquarters is not that important. At least Li Ji hasn't discovered this feature yet, and he doesn't know if the conditions are not enough or if he can't build multiple headquarters at all. We can only study it slowly in the future. But if it can be operated remotely, it will be exactly the same as when playing the game. Only in this way can it play its best role. I just need to send heavy troops to guard here and not let anyone damage this headquarters. Li Ji himself can also roam freely outside. So Li Ji no longer hesitated to operate inside the headquarters and stood outside, using all the remaining 9 stones of grain to produce civilian laborers. Anyway, Li Ji couldn't take out the resources in these systems. It's better to turn them into populations and collect resources for himself. After finishing all of these, Li Ji tried to turn off the light curtain in his mind. Sure enough, after Li Ji's mind twitched, the light curtain in his mind disappeared. With another thought, the light curtain reappeared. After understanding the operation of the golden finger, Li Ji stopped caring about it. Anyway, there is still nearly half an hour until the next commoner produces it. It's useless to wait here at the Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com. It's better to manipulate this existing commoner to collect resources. At the same time, Li Ji also wanted to see how quickly this commoner was collecting resources. Most importantly, Li Ji now felt hungry and had to search for food to satisfy his hunger. Otherwise, let alone compete for the world, he might starve to death in these mountains and forests at some point. So Li Ji immediately manipulated the only commoner and walked towards the mountains and forests. To Li Ji's surprise, he didn't need to use the mouse to slowly explore and search for resources as he did in the game, and he didn't need to find the resources himself in order to control the mean food to collect. But as long as Li Ji gives a command, this commoner can execute it on his own. For example, just now Li Ji just had a try attitude and asked this commoner to collect food, but he didn't expect him to walk directly into the mountains and forests. Obviously, I went to search for food. It's simply not too convenient. The rest is waiting, let's see how long it will take. However, when the next commoner is produced, the commoner who went out to search for food has not returned yet. This made Li Ji a bit anxious. I don't know if it was the commoner who encountered the danger and had already been solved, but still couldn't find the food, or if it took a long time to collect the food. Finally, Li Ji decided to go out and take a look instead of waiting here foolishly. However, before that, Li Ji had to arrange the work of this newly produced commoner and not let him stand here foolishly wasting time. When Li Ji looked at the young man and carefully examined the newly produced man, a huge stone fell from his heart. Chapter 4. God's Perspective. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. Previously, Li Ji was worried that the population produced by this golden finger would not be carved into a mold like in the game. If people see that the population under Li Ji looks the same in the future, they won't explain. Fortunately, although these two commoners were dressed the same and even had similar figures, there was still a difference in appearance. In this way, I won't be afraid of being seen by others in the future. After letting go of his worries, Li Ji arranged for this commoner to go logging. Although Li Ji still doesn't use wood, at least in the headquarters, he didn't find any place that needed the resource of wood. Preparing more can be considered as a precautionary measure. Another thing is that Li Ji also wants to see how long it takes to collect various resources, so that he can allocate the people to collect various resources reasonably in the future. After receiving the order from Li Ji to cut wood, the newly produced commoner immediately pulled out an axe from somewhere and walked towards the mountains and forests next to this valley. After arriving at a big tree, the man swung his axe and began to chop wood. However, I don't know if it's because this commoner's strength is not enough, or because the axe is not very sharp, or because of some other rule limitation. Anyway, the speed of logging by this commoner is relatively slow, and it seems that this big tree cannot be felled in a short period of time. Although Li Ji doesn't know the specific time, it doesn't seem like he can do it in a short period of time. So, Li Ji no longer cared about this lumberjack, but planned to go and see how the lumberjack who had been searching for food before was doing. So, Li Ji immediately walked towards the direction where the previous commoner had left. After entering the mountains and forests, Li Ji began to face difficulties because he had no idea where the commoner had gone. In this dense forest, Li Ji couldn't tell the direction at all. Just as Li Ji was thinking about where the previous commoner was, the next second, a scene appeared in his mind, which was exactly the figure of the previous commoner. That felt like a divine perspective while playing games, allowing Li Ji to have real-time control over the movements of his subordinates. This feature brought great joy to Li Ji's heart. With this feature, when I lead my own troops out to fight in the future, I won't have to go straight to heaven. This has a huge impact on the battlefield. Think about it, in ancient times, when others were commanding a war, they had to command the messenger or flag bearer, and it was impossible to balance the entire battlefield. But Li Ji was able to observe the entire battlefield from a divine perspective, and could command every soldier like an arm, pointing and fighting wherever they went. Which general can compare to Li Ji? This is simply cheating. Who can beat Li Ji? However, this is all for now. Li Ji's biggest concern is still the issue of food. One is that he needs food to satisfy his hunger, and the other is that Li Ji needs more food to produce more people. Only in this way can Li Ji develop and survive in the chaotic end of the Eastern Han dynasty. Since they could all be viewed directly from God's perspective, Li Ji didn't need to venture into the mountains and forests anymore, so he just started to look at it in his mind. This finally made Li Ji understand why he had waited so long, and this commoner had not returned yet. Originally, it was near this mountain valley where there was no food at all, and the farmer had walked a long way to find a fruit tree. At this time, where was he picking it? Looking at the distance, just walking alone would take at least half an hour. It's just that the speed of picking by this commoner is similar to that of a more normal person, and he doesn't know where the fruits he collected went. I've been picking here all along, and I don't know when I'll be back. Although Li Ji could make him come back immediately, he was afraid that this commoner would be like a farmer in a game. If he interrupted his collection midway, would his previous work be in vain and it would be impossible for him to bring back food. So, Li Ji can only wait here. So Li Ji had to return to the headquarters and wait with peace of mind. I can also stare at the lumberjack and see how long it will take him to collect 1 unit of wood. At the same time, I was also observing the farmer who was collecting fruits in my mind, which can be considered as using the function of the golden finger to observe the work of the two farmers at the same time. Quickly, half an hour passed and a new civilian worker was produced. Without saying a word, Li Ji asked this commoner to collect iron ore. Li Ji planned to collect each type of resource first. One is to check the collection speed of each resource, and the other is to use the rules that Minfu can automatically search for resources to explore the resources near this mountain depression, so as to facilitate his later work arrangements. So, the newly produced commoner pulled out a pickaxe from somewhere and walked towards the mountains and forests. After Li Ji arranged for this new man, the lumberjack finally made new progress, and the big tree was finally cut down by him. Then I saw him dragging the fallen tree towards the headquarters, looking for the book garden www.zhaozuiyuan.com. After he returned to the inside of the walking room, there was no movement, so the big tree disappeared. Upon seeing such a situation, Li Ji was immediately taken aback. He quickly opened the screen of light in his mind and saw that the previously only 10 units of wood had changed to the current 11 units. This also let Li Ji know the speed of wood collection. It takes half an hour for a commoner to obtain 1 unit of wood, and if the distance between them is quite long, the time spent on the journey must be included. Due to Li Ji's lack of knowledge about the consumption of this wood, it is unclear whether the wood can be considered fast at such a collection speed. However, Li Ji soon stopped focusing on these matters and made adjustments based on the situation. He decided to arrange how many people to go logging. So Li Ji once again focused his attention on the man who was collecting food. At this moment, the commoner also began to walk back, apparently collecting enough food and planning to send it back first. At the same time, Li Ji also calculated that the speed of collecting food seems to be the same as the speed of collecting wood. This surprised Li Ji a bit. After all, Li Ji knows the level of food consumption. A stone of grain can produce a commoner in half an hour, and a commoner can collect a portion of food in half an hour. Now Li Ji just needs to wait for this commoner to come back and see how many units of grain he can obtain from collecting food once. Later, Li Ji could arrange the number of food collectors based on the consumption rate. After the 4th commoner was produced and arranged by Li Ji to collect money, not long after, the 1st commoner to collect food returned. Chapter 5. Collection Efficiency. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. Just when Li Ji was filled with joy and thought there was food to eat, he didn't want the commoner to come directly to the headquarters and there would be no more. Then, the commoner turned around and left, walking towards the mountains and forests again. Li Ji was immediately stunned by this scene. When Li Ji realized it, he opened the light curtain and saw that the amount of grain that had already been consumed by Li Ji had once again increased to 1 unit. This also proves that a commoner can collect a stone of grain in half an hour, and this speed can be said to be quite fast. At this speed, even if we count the rush time, it only takes an hour and a half for a commoner to get himself a stone of grain. This must go against the heavens. You should know that in this era, there is no Grandpa Yuan, let alone those high-yield grains. If the land is cultivated normally, even in the good weather years, it will be a daifengshu, salad of assorted fresh vegetables, if 1 mu of land can produce 4 stones of grain. Generally, the yield is about 3 stone grains per mu. If God doesn't give us awesome, the yield will be even lower. That's also why so many people are starving to death. One reason is that the grain production in this era is indeed low, and another reason is that ordinary people do not have their own good fields. Even if they have their own land, it is still some unremarkable fields. How much food can they harvest in a year? If one person disperses and then saves, 1 kilogram of food per day is always needed. A stone of grain weighs only 120 kilograms, and can only be eaten by one person for 4 months. Over the course of a year, at least 3 stones of grain are needed to survive. High-quality farmland cannot even fall on the heads of ordinary people, as it has been taken over by those aristocratic families. Ordinary people can only go to less fertile wasteland to cultivate their own land. Over the course of a year, having 2 stones of grain per acre is enough. This is still a harvest that only occurs in times of favorable weather conditions. When encountering natural disasters, it is normal to have no harvest at all. The harvest of 1 acre of land is simply not enough for a common person to eat, and besides orphans, no family has a big family. In ancient times, people were very willing to have children. And those elderly, weak, women, and children cannot do any work and can only be raised by the young, which is even more insufficient to eat. Of course, some people also say that 1 acre of land is not enough, can't multiple acres of land be used? But don't everyone think about it, is there as much land as you want? Even if it is cultivated by yourself, it will not be dominated by aristocratic families. Does cultivation not require time? How can these time costs be calculated? Where do the seeds come from? Even if all of this is fine, do you know how heavy ancient taxes were? Being subjected to various harsh taxes and levies, the grain you harvest is almost non-existent. Moreover, in ancient times, you had to perform corvée labor, so you didn't have as much time to cultivate the land. This is also why many people would rather sell their land to become tenants of aristocratic families. Although this will never turn over, at least it won't starve to death. The original existence was like this, selling one's own land to a wealthy family and then becoming a tenant in the family. When farming is busy, I farm for the aristocratic family. The aristocratic family will give me stuttering. Although I can't eat enough or well, at least I won't starve to death. At other times, I have to go and do corvée labor, so let's not worry about living this life. It can be imagined how difficult people's lives are now. But now Li Ji can actually obtain 1 stone of grain in just 1 or 2 hours, and that commoner can at least collect more than 10 stones of grain in a day. What if there were more commoners? As time goes on, Li Ji's grain will have to be piled up. Even if Li Ji were to support the entire Han dynasty, it would probably not be a problem. Just as Li Ji was getting more and more excited, he suddenly thought of a very serious problem. That is to say, these foods are not created by the people out of thin air, but rather require food to be collected by them. At the beginning, there are some fruit trees in this mountain forest, but what about waiting for these fruit trees to be collected? Where are those commoners going to collect food? Besides, there aren't many fruit trees in this mountain forest, and most of them have been collected and scraped by nearby villagers. Otherwise, the people sent by Li Ji to search for food wouldn't have walked for half an hour before finding a fruit tree. Obviously, there isn't much food in these mountains and forests either. Thinking of this, Li Ji's beautiful dream was immediately awakened, and he wanted to support the entire Han dynasty alone. If this continued for a long time, he might not be able to eat enough himself. Thinking of what to eat made Li Ji even more depressed. The food collected by the commoner just now was thrown directly into the headquarters by him, turning into a string of data that cannot be retrieved at all. That is to say, although the commoner collected grain, Li Ji still couldn't eat it. This made Li Ji even more uncomfortable. It seems that I have to find a way to get food on my own, and relying on these golden fingers is obviously not enough, Li Ji thought to himself. So, Li Ji ignored the danger and followed the farmer who was collecting food towards the mountains and forests. Zhaozhuiyuan.com Li Ji decided that the food collected by the commoners would be used to increase the resources of the golden finger. He would take his own food and eat his own. Otherwise, what else can be done? You should know that Li Ji is already hungry and his chest is pressing against his back. Since these commoners are unreliable, they can only rely on themselves. Anyway, as long as you follow this commoner, you're not afraid of not being able to find food. Just as Li Ji was feeling the bitterness of his fate, with golden fingers already on him, and had to search for food on his own, he suddenly saw a wild rabbit bouncing around in front of him. This immediately brightened Li Ji's eyes. If we could catch this wild rabbit, it wouldn't be much better than picking wild fruits to eat. Li Ji, who was already powerless and dizzy from hunger, couldn't catch this wild rabbit. Just as Li Ji was thinking about how to catch the wild rabbit, he suddenly heard a sound of the bowstring vibrating in his ear. With a sound of shudder, the wild rabbit was nailed to the ground by an arrow. Then, Li Ji saw the man who had been walking not far in front of him before, the man who was going to collect food, somehow got a bow and arrow from somewhere and shot the wild rabbit to death. This reminded Li Ji that in the game of the Empire era, those farmers were omnipotent. When encountering animals, they will use bows and arrows to kill their prey, and then collect their meat. When you ask them to go logging, they will take out axes, and when they go mining, they will take out pickaxes. Li Ji had seen these before among the lumberjacks and miners. I didn't expect this commoner to be just like in the game. It was an unexpected joy and there was no need to prepare various tools for them anymore. Chapter 6. Terrifying Properties. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. In this way, even if the wild fruits were gone, Li Ji could still let these commoners go hunting, which could be considered as an additional way to collect food. I just don't know if there are many prey in the mountains and forests, or if it's enough to develop on my own. Just as Li Ji was thinking about these things, he saw that the commoner had already approached the wild rabbit and was preparing to collect rabbit meat. This has made Li Ji very anxious. If this wild rabbit is collected by the commoners, there won't be any Li Ji's share left. In the end, it can only become data that can be seen but not eaten in the golden finger. Li Ji is still hungry now, so naturally he wouldn't let such a thing happen. So, without saying a word, Li Ji manipulated the man in his mind to search for food in other places, which could be considered as interrupting the man's operation and saving the wild rabbit from danger. And Li Ji didn't care too much, so he immediately ran over to pick up the wild rabbit, afraid of being fooled by the appearance of the commoner. With this wild rabbit, Li Ji's food finally had a place to eat, and there were also certain dangers in the mountains and forests. Li Ji immediately walked back. It's better to be careful before you have the ability to protect yourself. Returning to his headquarters, Li Ji was handling the wild rabbit while observing the movements of several laborers. The number 1 food collector once again found a fruit tree and is picking it. The second commoner was still chopping trees not far away, and Li Ji could see it when he looked up. The third and fourth commoners, one was sent by Li Ji to search for iron ore, and the other was sent by Li Ji to search for money. However, these two things don't seem so easy to find. These two commoners are still wandering in the mountains and forests. This made Li Ji very helpless. Sure enough, although the speed at which these commoners collect resources is not too slow, the prerequisite is that you have the resources. It's easy to say about the iron ore, maybe it's located near the mountains and forests. But money is hard to say. Where are you looking for money in this wilderness? Are you going to pick up copper coins that others accidentally dropped in the mountains? Not to mention whether there is such a good thing, even if there is, when will we have to pick up enough copper coins to raise enough money to increase 1 unit of money in the golden finger? However, even if he thought of this, Li Ji did not let the fourth commoner come back. Anyway, it's just a commoner, let's just let him explore the map. By the way, Li Ji also wanted to see how the money was collected, and whether this commoner would directly leave the mountains and go outside to steal someone else's money. If we really go to grab it, what about the combat effectiveness of this commoner? These issues need to be explored slowly by Li Ji. The most important thing now is to fill your stomach first. Quickly, Li Ji managed to handle the wild rabbit, and at this point, the fifth commoner also produced it. Li Ji considered that other resources were not lacking at the moment, so he asked this commoner to search for food as well, and he started cooking the wild rabbit himself. After Li Ji had eaten enough, he realized that he had only looked at the attributes of those commoners and didn't know what his attributes looked like. Can you check them? So, Li Ji's mind moved and he silently read to check his attributes. Sure enough, the next moment, a new light curtain appeared in front of Li Ji. Host. Li Ji Force. 20. Long-term malnutrition, extremely thin and weak body. Commander-in-Chief. 50. Modern people's thinking bonus, with certain commander abilities. Intelligence. 65. After all, I am also a high school graduate, and my intelligence is still online. Internal affairs. 60. Modern people have a thinking bonus and certain management abilities. Charm. 85. A big handsome ratio, which is that the temperament and clothing lag behind, coupled with long-term malnutrition, the body is relatively thin and weak, looking a bit weak and lacking in charm, which affects the charm. Looking at his own attributes, Li Ji felt speechless in his heart. Apart from being handsome, everything else is simply useless. Intelligence and domestic affairs have at least passed, but the commander and military force cannot even pass. How can I say that I am also a modern person? After reading so many novels and movies, does my ability to lead troops to fight still fail? Isn't this nonsense? Fortunately, Li Ji quickly stopped getting tangled up and had the divine perspective bestowed upon him by his golden finger. Even if his command ability failed, what would happen? As a cheater, still using your honest military commander to fight. After thinking about these things, Li Ji no longer hesitated about his commander-in-chief attributes. By learning more, he could always improve. Besides, he could also cheat. In terms of commander-in-chief, Li Ji can be said to be not afraid of anyone. After all, no matter what era it is, information is incredibly important. Having a god's perspective on oneself is equivalent to lighting up the entire map. In this era where everyone is fighting with real swords and guns, if one still cannot command soldiers to fight well, then Li Ji will just hide here and return. Why talk about dominating the world? It was the strength that left Li Ji speechless. A force value of only 20 points, although it looks the same as a commoner, you can imagine it with your heel. In situations where other attributes are so high, these 20 points of force value are definitely scum. Zhaozuiyuan.com. Although Li Ji has not yet had contact with the outside world, he does not know what other people's normal attributes are. How powerful are those invincible generals, such as Lu Bu, the invincible god of war in humans, and Lu Bu, the red rabbit in horses? What is the strength value of the 5 tiger generals under Liu Bei, including Guan Yu, Zhang Fei, Zhao Yun, Ma Chao, and Huang Zhong? What is the strength value of Jian Wei, who is invincible in infantry under Cao Cao's command, and Su Chu, who is known as the Tiger Idiot? But Li Ji knew that his 20 points of strength were not even worthy of lifting shoes for others. Not to mention, compared to those top generals, even ordinary generals have explosive power points. I'm afraid that my 20 points of strength are only equivalent to the strength of an ordinary soldier, and even inferior. This conclusion was drawn by Li Ji based on his own physical condition. There's no way, who knows, Li Ji's body is too thin and weak now. Long-term malnutrition and fatigue have left his body empty. Li Ji knows why the lifespan of ancient people was so low, which is excessive consumption. Now Li Ji is satisfied with having the same level of strength as those strong-looking men. However, the fact that the commoner looked so strong but had the same level of strength as himself made Li Ji feel a bit unreasonable. I don't know if it's the game settings or some unknown rules that restrict it. In Li Ji's view, although his military strength is the same as that of the commoner, if the two fight, he will definitely not be the opponent of that commoner. At least on the surface, it seems like this. As for the specific situation, Li Ji is not a masochist and naturally wouldn't go to fight with the commoners to test it. What if he can't beat him and gets abused? Chapter 7. Harvest of the Night. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, he doesn't want face, especially if he gets beaten, it will be very painful. As a modern person, I am not as capable of enduring hardship as ancient people. Since there were no people from this world to compare, Li Ji could only wait until he had a reference in the future. Li Ji believes that after he recovers his body in the future and exercises more, his strength should be able to increase slightly. Besides, what if we can't improve? As a modern person, Li Ji is still very afraid of death. He would not rush ahead in everything like other travelers, leading by example to kill enemies. Unless Li Ji possesses invincible force, it would be almost enough to sweep everything. But relying solely on Li Ji's 20-point force value, this is clearly not realistic. So, it's better to hide behind and command the people produced by the Golden Finger to charge into the battle. Anyway, the soldiers he explodes are not afraid of death, and as long as there are resources, there is no limit to the quantity. Is it not good to use the tactics of a sea of people to push horizontally? Why put yourself in such a dangerous situation? After thinking about these things, Li Ji's mood improved a lot. The next time is to wait bored. As new laborers were produced one by one, Li Ji sent them all out to search for food. Anyway, Li Ji won't be able to use other resources for the time being, just like having a commoner collect wood first. And resources like iron ore are definitely of great use on the right side, but several hours have passed and the commoner is still wandering in the mountains and forests. Obviously, this iron ore is not so easy to find. Perhaps there is no iron ore in this forest, so let him slowly search and treat it as an exploration map. And the money is also the same. The commoner is also wandering aimlessly, and I don't know how he is looking for money, but Li Ji is not in a hurry, take it slow. On the contrary, that food is the most scarce resource for Li Ji now. After all, as long as there was food, Li Ji could produce countless laborers and expand his own population. With an increasing population, whether it's for collecting resources or serving as soldiers, expanding one's territory is a great choice. So now Li Jiba cannot afford to have endless food to produce more people. So, naturally, the more common people gather food, the better. However, the food in these mountains and forests is getting fewer and fewer. So far, Li Ji has sent more than 10 laborers to collect food, but most of them have wasted time on the search for food. The actual food collected was not very much, and all of it was used by Li Ji to produce new people. Otherwise, Li Ji wouldn't have more than a dozen commoners to collect food. Now Li Ji has a population of 16. Apart from one logging, one searching for iron ore, and one searching for money, the remaining 13 laborers are collecting food. The only fortunate thing is that during this period, the lumberjacks have collected 8 or 9 pieces of wood and are still continuously logging. And the commoner who was searching for iron ore also gained something, and was working hard to mine it. He would soon be able to bring back the iron ore for Li Ji. It was the commoner searching for money who was still wandering around. After several hours of exploration, the commoner had already left the mountainous area and continued to explore outside. Boring Li Ji also focused his attention on this commoner, hoping to learn about the situation outside. Also pass the boring time by the way. Watching the sky outside almost darken, Li Ji also gave up the idea of searching for food again. Previously, he ate a plump wild rabbit and could barely support it. It's much better than the previous day when I could only drink a bowl of porridge. After dark, the mountains and forests are still very dangerous, so Li Ji naturally wouldn't take any risks. They have all crossed over, and there are still golden fingers. There is still a beautiful life waiting for him, and Li Ji is very willing to sacrifice his life. So, Li Ji returned directly to the thatched cottage, observing the people who had already walked out of the mountains and forests while resting. I don't know how long it has been, but the commoner outside hasn't noticed any signs of human habitation yet. After all, he slowly explored the past and had no specific purpose, so his speed naturally slowed down. But Li Ji didn't know when he had already fallen asleep. After experiencing the magical experience of time travel and obtaining the golden finger, the ups and downs of emotions made Li Jiben very tired. Now he is lying there bored and not sleeping, which is strange. Li Ji fell asleep, but those commoners didn't need to rest and continued to work hard according to Li Ji's previous orders. Silent all night the next morning, after a night's rest, Li Ji woke up full of energy. The first thing Li Ji did when he woke up was to check his own resources. Population: 18 grain. 24, 2 collected, 12 people exploring, wood. 39, collected by 1 person, iron ore. 18, collected by 1 person, money. 10, 1 person exploring. Seeing the data on this resource panel, Li Ji felt a wave of disappointment when searching for Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com. The commoner who was searching for money still had no harvest all night. Li Ji switched to the scene where he was, and found that he was still slowly swaying somewhere, obviously still unable to find the place to collect the money. And the lumberjack, after 17 hours of collection starting from yesterday afternoon, collected a total of 29 pieces of wood. Li Ji calculated a little and found that it takes about 35 minutes to collect a piece of wood. However, just thinking about it, logging alone takes half an hour, and there are also a few minutes to bring the wood back to the headquarters and then walk to the location where the logging is being carried out. This time is quite normal. And the man who collects iron ore is also similar. It takes half an hour to mine, over an hour to walk back and forth, and about 100 minutes to collect 1 piece of iron ore. In addition, he wasted a lot of time searching for iron ore before, so now he has only collected 8 pieces of iron ore. What made Li Ji most dissatisfied was that before going to bed yesterday, he sent the last commoner out to collect food, and the number of people collecting food had already reached 14. But these 14 people, in one night, only collected 24 grains, which is a bit excessive. However, Li Ji could also figure it out. After all, as the food in the mountains and forests was collected, the amount of food they could find decreased. They spent most of their time searching for food, which was normal. Looking at the 24 cents of grain on the panel, Li Ji didn't use all of it to produce civilian laborers as he did yesterday. In Li Ji's view, the food in the mountains and forests is becoming increasingly scarce, and even if more people are dispatched to collect it, even if food cannot be found, it is also a waste of manpower. I haven't seen where there are still 12 commoners wandering around and haven't even found food to collect. Chapter 8. New Buildings. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, what's the point of having more people searching for food? It's better to keep the resources and see if we can think of other ways to continue production when needed later. Anyway, producing a commoner only takes half an hour, and it won't take much time. So Li Ji immediately walked out of the thatched cottage, intending to see if he could find something to fill his stomach. As for other matters, let's wait until we have enough to eat. When Li Ji arrived outside the thatched cottage, he saw a commoner standing there foolishly. It was then that Li Ji remembered that this should have been produced from the last grain before he went to bed last night. Later, due to falling asleep and not giving him any orders, he stood outside the headquarters all night foolishly. I wasted a whole night in vain. However, Li Ji did not blame himself too much. After all, even if he was sent out, he was likely to be sent out to search for food. Without resources, it was impossible to bring any benefits to Li Ji. So, even if this commoner wasted a night, there was no actual loss. However, Li Ji couldn't let him idle either. Thinking that he might need more iron or in the future, Li Ji planned to send this commoner to mine as well. He couldn't just stand there foolishly. All of them have been produced, and if we don't create profits for ourselves, it would be too wasteful. But just as Li Ji focused his attention on this commoner and planned to issue orders to him, he suddenly noticed a different situation. As Li Ji looked at the commoner, another interface appeared in his mind, with an icon that he had never seen before. This is a situation that Li Ji did not see yesterday. Although Li Ji did not know how this new interface came about, what triggered the conditions, whether it was the population, resource quantity, or time relationship, these were unknown to him. After all, Li Ji has played many real-time strategy games and knows that the newly added icons represent new features. In addition to being able to collect various resources, this commoner in the game can also build new buildings. This is a universal gameplay for all real-time strategy games. After seeing this new icon, Li Ji immediately realized that he had achieved some kind of requirement, which is why he started this new icon. So, Li Ji didn't bother to send this commoner to mine, and instead threw his hungry rumbling matter out of the blue, staring intently at this new icon. The next second, an introduction appeared in Li Ji's mind. Mill Research Agricultural Technology. Production requires 30 units of wood and takes 1 hour. Upon seeing the introduction of this icon, Li Ji was immediately overjoyed. Now Li Ji can almost be certain that his golden finger seems to be a real-time strategy game he played on Earth before called Empire Age. Even if not, there is still a great connection between the two. Some settings may have been modified by magic, but they are still roughly the same. After all, isn't this mill a product of the Imperial era, even with similar functions? As for Li Ji's excitement, although he knew the origin of the golden finger, more importantly, the appearance of this mill was of great help to him. As long as there is this mill, the problem of not being able to find food will be easily solved. If Li Ji remembers correctly, as long as he produces this mill, he can let the farmers farm their own fields. When the time comes, there will be no need to look for food everywhere, just plant it yourself. In this way, Li Ji could harvest an endless amount of food. How could this not make Li Ji feel excited? At the same time, Li Ji also understood why he didn't discover this new feature yesterday. It turned out to be due to insufficient resources. As expected, just like playing games, certain conditions need to be met in order to produce new buildings and units. My own golden finger is also the same. Yesterday, I couldn't see this icon because I didn't have enough wood. If that were the case, Li Ji would have arranged for more people to go logging yesterday instead of wasting their hands searching for food. Otherwise, Li Ji would have discovered this feature long ago. Since the conditions have been met now, what are we waiting for? Of course, it directly consumes resources to produce new buildings. So, at the command of Li Ji, the commoner who had just stood foolishly immediately took out a hammer from somewhere and stared at Li Ji with a serious expression on his face. At the same time, a map also appeared in Li Ji's mind, which was the area he had already explored around him. And there is also a green cursor flashing on the map. Li Ji, who had played real-time strategy games, naturally knew that this was to determine the location of the mill's construction. Li Ji considered that this mill would be used to produce grain in the future, so he went to the Shuyuan website www.zhaoshuyuan.com. After the farmers collected the grain, they had to send it back to the headquarters. In order to prevent these laborers from wasting their time on the road, Li Ji immediately decided to build this mill near the headquarters. There is a large open space right in front of the headquarters, and yesterday the lumberjack cut down a lot of trees, making the open space in front of the headquarters even larger. It can be used to build a mill, and the farmland behind it can also be built around the mill. After collecting the grain, it will also be much more convenient to deliver it to the headquarters. After Li Ji determined the location, the commoner immediately struck with a hammer at the designated location, and out of nowhere, some wooden stakes appeared on the empty land. This picture is exactly the same as playing the game. As the old man continued to strike the ground against the wooden stakes that had emerged out of thin air, the outline of the mill became increasingly plump. However, based on the progress in the game, this speed is still too slow. Compared to the construction speed in the real world, it's not just a little faster. Li Ji saw that it would take some time for the construction of this mill to be completed, and suddenly remembered that in the game, it seemed like multiple farmers would build it together, which would be much faster. Therefore, Li Ji no longer hesitated and immediately asked the headquarters to start producing civilian laborers again. However, this time Li Ji behaved well and did not squander all his resources like yesterday. Instead, he decided to produce one by one. Anyway, Li Ji has nothing else to do, he's just here to guard. It's better to wait for this commoner to produce before continuing to produce the next one. In this way, resources can be left in the golden finger. If there are any new features that require resources in the future, you can also discover them as soon as possible. Chapter 9. Mills and Farmlands. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. After finishing these things, Li Ji thought again that since there was a mill, the people who were wandering around searching for food outside had no need to continue. The food in this mountain forest has been collected all day yesterday and there is not much left. It's better to maximize the interests of these commoners and do other things instead of wasting time searching for food. Thinking of this, it happened that the commoners were not far from the location of the iron mine, so Li Ji immediately let the 12 idle commoners go to mine. Whether in the game or in the real world, the role of iron ore is significant. Collect more now, it will definitely have a big impact in the future. Moreover, with today's wood quantity reaching a certain level, it has unlocked the mill's lessons from the past. Li Ji also wants to see what new functions will emerge after the quantity of iron ore reaches a certain level. As for the remaining 2 servants, as they were still collecting food, Li Ji did not interrupt them. After they returned, he would arrange for them to go and chop down the trees. After finishing all of this, the next step is to wait for the mill to be built. Quickly, half an hour had passed, and the new man was produced. Li Ji immediately asked him to join the team building the mill, which added an extra man. Li Ji clearly felt that the construction speed of the mill had improved a bit. Just how much has been improved, Li Ji cannot see the progress bar and countdown like playing games, so he is not sure. However, as long as there is an effect. Not long after, the 2 food collectors also returned, adding 2 units of food to Li Ji's supply. Just when these 2 commoners wanted to go collect food again, they were left behind by Li Ji and joined the ranks of building the mill. Soon, the mill was successfully built. Without saying a word, Li Ji stared intently at the mill and a new light curtain appeared in his mind, with only one icon on it, resembling a patch of farmland. Li Ji looked at the icon and a message suddenly appeared in his mind. Farmland planting grains construction requires 1 unit of grain consumption. Upon seeing such an introduction, Li Ji was immediately delighted. As he had guessed before, with this mill, he could build farmland and grow his own food. At the same time, Li Ji also felt fortunate for his wit. Fortunately, he had not used all his grain to produce laborers before, otherwise even if there were mills now, there would be no grain to build farmland. So, without saying a word, Li Ji started building farmland directly. The next moment, Li Ji found that his grain was 1 unit less, and at the same time, a farmer began to work next to the mill. A square piece of farmland appeared next to the mill. However, at this moment, Li Ji had no intention of paying attention to that commoner, as he was working there and didn't have to worry about him at all. Now Li Ji only wants to build more farmland and produce a large amount of food, which is the right path. Soon, with Li Ji's frenzy, 5 pieces of farmland appeared out of thin air near the mill. However, when Li Ji wanted to continue, he found that he couldn't move. At this moment, Li Ji realized that there were no more laborers nearby. No wonder this farmland could not continue to be built. Li Ji finally discovered that in order to build this farmland, not only would 1 unit of food be consumed, but also a farmer would be needed to cultivate it. Originally, Li Ji only had 1 commoner, but later produced 1, and with the addition of the 2 commoners who had collected food before, there were a total of 4 commoners. However, just now a new commoner was produced and was on standby nearby. When Li Ji was building farmland, this commoner was naturally summoned directly. Now that farmland cannot be built, we can only wait for new farmers to produce it. At this moment, Li Ji was already starving and couldn't bear it anymore. Instead of waiting here for the construction of the farmland to be completed, it was better to find something to eat. However, at the thought of his powerless hands, Li Jika was not confident that he could find food. There was no way. Li Ji could only make the lumberjack stop and go with him to the mountains and forests to search for food. I don't know if it was unfortunate or if it was really luck. A dozen or so people searched in the mountains and forests all night without finding much food, but Li Ji only entered the mountains and forests for less than 10 minutes when he saw a pheasant. The rest of the matter goes without saying. This mountain chicken was directly shot to death on the ground by the commoner with an arrow. Li Ji saw that he had received the food and immediately asked the man to continue cutting down trees, while he also carried the pheasant back. When Li Ji returned to the vicinity of the base, he found that the farmland next to the mill was already quite presentable, and green seedlings had also grown in those plots of farmland. At this pace, I'm afraid it won't be long before I can reap the rewards. Sure enough, this golden finger cannot be viewed with common sense. Normally, it is impossible to grow seedlings in the farmland without 10.5 days, and it is simply impossible to find the Shuyuan website www.zhaoshuyuan.com. But now, in just a dozen or so minutes, we have achieved such results. The speed is not just a little bit faster. Next, while dealing with the pheasant, Li Ji stared at the 5 farmlands and wanted to see how long it would take from construction to harvest. Not long after, another commoner was produced, and without a word, Li Ji built another piece of farmland. Then Li Ji ate roasted chicken while waiting for the crops in the fields to ripen. Don't ask where the fire comes from, asking is to drill wood to make a fire. How can you do with me? I care how difficult it is for you to drill wood to make a fire, hee. Until a few seconds before another commoner was produced, the green seedlings in the farmland that Li Ji had been staring at suddenly turned golden. Li Ji knew that the grain had matured. And those laborers working in the fields also began to collect. Seeing such a scene, Li Ji showed a satisfied smile on his face and also calculated it. This farmland takes an hour from construction to grain maturity. This is much faster than the 3 or 4 months required for normal cultivation. With the blessing of Li Ji's golden finger, it only takes an hour. This directly increases the ripening time of grain by thousands of times, so I'll ask you if it's good or not. How could Li Ji not be satisfied with this? How could he not laugh? At this moment, Li Ji looked like a child weighing over 100 pounds, happily dancing and bouncing around. Coincidentally, another new commoner was born, and Li Ji naturally wouldn't let him idle. He immediately asked him to build another piece of farmland and start working. Chapter 10. Grain has settled down. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. Half an hour later, Li Ji finally saw those laborers gathering and walking towards the mill with the grain. Not long after, when the farmer turned around and returned to the farmland that belonged to him, Li Ji found that his food had increased by 1 unit. But the farmland seemed to have never been harvested at all, and the farmer continued to collect. I just don't know how many times this piece of farmland can be collected, just like in the game. Collecting a few times is not enough, it needs to be cultivated again, or it can be collected infinitely. This will take time to verify. In the following time, Li Ji watched as the farmers collected food while letting the newly produced farmers build new farmland. However, when Li Ji wanted to build the 9th piece of farmland, he could not produce it. This made Li Ji a bit depressed. Li Ji checked his resources and population and found that there were no issues. Although the construction of farmland consumed 8 units of grain, the production of farmers consumed 6 units, and there is still 1 unit in production, that is only 7 units. 8 pieces of farmland with 8 farmers, one of whom was produced last night, 2 were collected from food before, and another 5 farmers were produced to make up 8 people. Now there is still 1 idle and 1 in production. These expenses add up to only 15 units of grain. During these 3 hours, the first hour was spent building a mill, and the middle hour was spent building farmland waiting for the grain to ripen. In the following hour, the 5 ripe grains were collected twice, allowing Li Ji to harvest 10 units of grain. That is to say, Li Ji only consumed 5 units of grain before and after this. 2 other laborers brought back 2 units of grain midway, so Li Ji's grain was only 3 units less. Last night, there were 24 units of grain left, which means that Li Ji still has 21 units of grain now. Why can't we continue to build farmland when resources and farmers are available? Li Ji looked up and saw that the mill was already surrounded by farmland, and with the mill itself, it looked like a 9-palace grid. Seeing this, Li Ji finally understood what was going on. Li Ji remembers that in the game, there seemed to be only 8 pieces of farmland around a mill. If he wanted more farmland, he had to build a new mill. Unexpectedly, in this real world, this setting is still the same. This is a bit of a jerk. Helplessly, after figuring out the key point, Li Ji had to build another mill. Unexpectedly, just when Li Ji wanted to take action, he realized that he didn't have enough wood. There was no other way, Li Ji had to let this idle man go logging, and then connect the newly produced men who were also arranged by Li Ji to go logging. Li Ji, who was fed and bored, had been staring at the farmers all along, hoping to see how many times the grain in these fields could be collected when it was ripe. This is related to how much food resources Li Ji can obtain later, which is a big deal. Even the commoner searching for money outside, Li Ji had no time to take care of it. In this way, another hour and a half passed, and when these laborers delivered the grain to the mill for the 5th time, the farmland immediately went from its previous golden appearance to a dilapidated state, looking as if it had been ruined by something, and no more grain could be seen. This also made Li Ji understand that after a piece of farmland matures, it can only be collected 5 times before being recultivated. However, even so, overall, Li Ji still made a profit. After all, building a piece of farmland only requires the consumption of 1 unit of grain and 1 farmer, and this farmer can be almost negligible. After all, this farmer will not be consumed and can be recycled. That piece of farmland only needs to consume 1 unit of grain, perhaps these expenses are the seeds of the farmland. However, the harvest was also significant. A piece of farmland can directly obtain 5 units of grain, which has increased several times. And time only takes 3.5 hours, even if we include the time for the laborers to transport grain midway, it is only a few more minutes, almost negligible. Where can I find such a good deal? By sending 8 laborers and consuming 8 units of grain, Li Ji could harvest 40 units of grain in just 3.5 hours. In one day, he could harvest over 260 units of grain. This efficiency can be said to be not fast. Even if 56 units of grain were consumed as seeds in the middle, over 200 units of grain would be received by the end of that day. Besides, this is still only 1 mill's efficiency, so if there are more mills later on, Li Ji will harvest more grain in a day. After all, these farmers do not need rest, and this farmland is not like the real world, with differences in spring, summer, autumn, and winter. and can be cultivated continuously. Thinking of this, Li Ji felt that he would soon become the person with the most food in the world. It's so refreshing. When there is food, are you afraid that no one will help him dominate the world? The most important thing is to find the book garden www.zhaozuiyuan.com. These commoners do not need Li Ji to constantly command them. After they have collected all the mature grain, they will automatically consume the grain and cultivate it again. This is the conclusion drawn by Li Ji after seeing them plow again. As long as Li Ji still has food resources, they will have an endless cycle. Unless Li Ji asks them to stop, there is no need for Li Ji to worry at all. This is simply not too satisfying. Since Li Ji no longer needed to worry here, he then turned his gaze from the mill to the lumberjacks. At this point, the lumberjacks had already arrived at 5 people, and in half an hour, Li Ji could obtain 5 units of wood. Soon he will be able to build the mill again, and there will be more farmland and harvest more food. However, the wood is not enough now, so we can only wait. However, Li Ji did not stop producing civilian laborers. After all, whether it's farming or logging, it will require a lot of laborers. Li Ji, who had free time, had time to observe the commoner wandering outside in search of money. Now Li Ji has lost hope that the commoner can collect money, and he is completely allowed to explore the map outside. However, what Li Ji did not expect was that after a day and night of exploration, this commoner had already gone far away. What surprised Li Ji the most was that he saw a nearby village through the sight of the commoner. It was bustling with people coming and going. Based on his original memory, Li Ji quickly recognized that this was his previous tenant Shuangzi, belonging to a very small family that had never been recorded in history.